Peace and love, family. Welcome to another Read Book Club discussion. Tonight, we are discussing Chapter 3 of The Color of Law. Chapter 3 of The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. All right, Richard Rothstein. And so, you already know who I am. You already know who Brother T is, but we're going to introduce ourselves to you anyway. Peace and love. My name is Dr. Ma'at. I'm the host for the evening, and I have with me Brother T. Wolo. Brother T. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Brother T, to the listening audience.
Hey family, how you doing? And Brother T in the house once again, talking about a powerful chapter, racial zoning. Can't wait to get into it. Hope everyone has their pen and paper next to them. If not, have the book open to page. What page is this? Page 38.
Yeah, 38. Yep, 38. All right, and family, look, if you don't have the book, because you know, Brother T, it'll be people be like, oh, they talking about a book. Let me get out of here. Oh, I don't have the book. I didn't read the chapter. No. It's a discussion. Stay for the discussion. Stay for the build because you will learn something. You know, my mother, she watches our book club discussions. She doesn't read. She doesn't have the book, doesn't read any chapters. But she's like, every time she tunes in to our book club discussions, she says she walks away learning something new. And so, you know, if you don't have the book, don't worry, family. Just stay around. You know, we're going to have a wonderful build tonight. We're going to be talking about white flight in the image of Black slum dwellers. And, you know, Brother T, I took that directly from the book, you know, when he talked about how, you know, based on these ordinances, how they created Black slums. And so the image of Black people became Black slum dwellers. And so they said that's why when Black folks move into neighborhoods, white flight happens because they like, oh, here come the slums, here come the slum dwellers, you know. But how did that come to be? You know, that our neighborhoods, you know, turned into ghettos and slums. And so we're going to be unpacking that tonight. I do want to shout out a few people, Brother T, who just joined early. My early bird family. Yapo, he said, peace to you, Dr. Ma'at. He said, looking forward to another enlightening, uplifting bill. So peace and love to you, Brother Yapo. Peace and love to you, Brother CJ Young Jr. He said, peace and love, family. So glad, Brother CJ, you were able to catch us live. Because sometimes he can catch us, sometimes he'll catch us live, sometimes he can't, but he always contributes to the build. Even if he catches it later, he says something underneath the you know, leaves a comment underneath the video.
Yes,
so peace to Brother CJ Young. I see Blockchain Revolution is in the building. Blockchain said peace and power. Then we have Maine Armstead is in the building. He says love and light to everyone in the chat. Peace and love to you, brother. Then we have a beautiful mind. Peace, Queen. I love when the sisters come. I love when the sisters come and build because we need more, Brother T. You know, we need more. You know, this arena is very, very male dominated. When you're talking about the books and you getting into the knowledge, it's a lot of brothers who show up, and we need more sisters to show up. So I love when I see people like, you know, a beautiful mind or Crystal Denise or Sister Amani when she chimes in. I love it. So peace and love to your beautiful mind. I see Ron Green. My Hotep to you, brother. My Hotep to you. I say Iso Abula. You said hi, our queen. Oh, yeah. Yep. From Togo. I got your email, brother. So let's get some work done. You know, I told you I'm willing to bring it out there to Togo, but I need some connections. Okay. Some solid and safe connections, you know, before I jump on the plane and get out there. So, you know, let me know what's going on. I got your email. You said give you a month or two and you'll get back to me. So I'm waiting on your email, brother. All right. Waiting on your email. I see Crystal Denise is in the building. Crystal Denise is in the building. That's my girl right there. Peace and love to you, Crystal Denise. She's doing a lot of work for African Center School. She has African Center School. And so peace and love to the queen. She's doing some things, doing some wonderful things for our babies. And so peace and love to you, Sister Crystal Denise. Before we get started, family, let me share my screen really quickly for those who may have missed the broadcast that I did with Professor James Small on the historic Lincoln Heights Emergency Fund. So there was a Black community which was established in the early 1900s. It's called R.E.A.D. Okay, well, they call it the Black community of Lincoln Heights, right? It located in Weed, California. And yeah, you heard me right, WEED. And that's not because they sell it there, okay? It was because that was the name of the people who owned, I think, the mill or built the mill initially. And so they named the whole town after that person, because that mill was like the economic engine in that particular area. And so a lot of people migrated out of like I think he said Arkansas and Mississippi. So they migrated from the south, north. I think that's northwest. And so anyway, a fire occurred at the mill where they produced the lumber. Fire occurred there and burned up a lot of homes, burned down, just burnt down the town, burnt down the district. I heard that a lot of brothers and sisters right now are in hotels. Okay. A lot of brothers and sisters are in hotels and they lost everything. Some people died in the fire. They lost everything. So anyway, Professor James Small, this impacted him. His family's still there. So I know a lot of you seen Professor James Small in New York, but he's not from New York. He's from Beaufort, South Carolina. And his brother and a lot of people from Beaufort, South Carolina migrated to the Black community of Lincoln Heights, and so a lot of his family members are there. I spoke to Baba and he sounded just distraught, when it happened, and he reached out to me. He said, and I need help raising funds. And so I brought him on and we were able, Brother T, to raise a few $1,000s. So salute to all of my supporters, man. Like you all came through. We all came through. I think I donated about 500, Brother T, from the company, R.E.A.D Enemy Productions. We donated 500 because I don't believe in asking people to do something that I don't do myself, right? So we donated and live, like right in front of everybody, donated the 500, and then different people just started donating 20 here, 20 there, 100 here, 50 there, just giving what they can. And so anyway, family, they're up to about 34,000. They asked for 50,000, but Brother T, I was disgusted, when I saw that, they've only raised 35,000. You know what I mean? Because we spend our money. My whole thing is when we talk about these Black billionaires or successful Black people, in our community, this is nothing. You could, I mean, I don't want to start counting other people's money, but what I'm saying is that, Brother T, we have enough funds in our community to pull together to make sure these brothers and sisters are okay, and so to see that 35, they only asked for 50. Shoot, I wish they would have asked for 1 million, Brother T, or a few million. You get what I'm saying? Because like I said, these families lost everything. Everything is gone. Everything they own is gone, and so we as a community right now should be sending money, sending what we can. I'm going to make another donation when I get paid this week. I'm going to make another donation to them because I can't imagine, Brother T, uh, going to bed one night, waking up the next morning, and a fire happens, and my family and I just lose everything, and then we have to stay in a hotel. We don't have any hygiene products. We have nothing but ourselves. And I mean, I give thanks that those people survived, but I just think that we as a community should be pulling our resources together and sending it out there, to these brothers and sisters to make sure they're okay. So family, I'm going to drop the link in the chat. Please give what you can. If you got $10, give $10. You got 20, give 20, give what you can. All right. Give what you can to support these brothers and sisters. And Brother T, this was a community that was built, by Black people. The houses that were burnt down are houses that have been passed down from generation. Remember, I said the town was established in the early 1900s. And so the houses that burnt down, a lot of these houses were passed down from generation to generation, houses that Black people actually built when they migrated to this particular part of the U.S. A lot of the structures, the churches, these men and women built these buildings with their bare hands. And so there was a pastor from Lincoln Heights that Professor James Small had called while we were during our broadcast. And he said that, the Black folks said they're not going anywhere. They were saying, look, this is the land of my ancestors. And so we just going to stay here and we're going to rebuild. They said we're not going to run, because think about it, Brother T. If they all ran after this, now you have an open area where what's going to happen. White folks are going to come in, build. Developers are going to come in, build. But those Black folks said, no, we're going to rebuild our community. And so they shouldn't have to shoulder that weight by themselves. And so family, make sure that you give. Okay. Make sure that you give. Okay, give what you can. All right. So anyway, brother T, go ahead and start us off with chapter 3. I can't hear you, brother T. You're muted.
I'm muting myself. I'm sorry. Um, this chapter is called Racial Zoning, chapter 3. Um, always, Mr. Rothstein has put like a nice little caption. And what he's talking about in this chapter is how whites put a pamphlet out for the community to just make sure that blacks would not move in their community. Um, and one thing that I got from the first couple pages, Dr. Ma'at, and you may also have this highlighted as a point. It talked about how a change of power came at our expense. And I wrote that quote down that when I read this first page, I came up with a change of power came at our expense. And the reason why I state that is that on the first page, on this page, after the Civil War, liberated slaves dispersed throughout the United States, seeking work and to escape the violence of the post-war. For several decades, many lived relatively peacefully in the East, the Midwest, and the West. But in 1877, the disputed presidential election of the previous autumn was resolved in a compromise that gave Republican candidate Rutherford B. Hayes the White House. Now, the reason why I read that, because I had to talk about how when presidents become presidents, when they're elected,
that's right.
Believe me, they have to make deals. In order for them to come into the House, the Democrats and Republicans, I believe, you got to as a trade-off. And in this trade-off, we had to be left down, and certain privileges had to be taken away from us. So I'll read on that Republican candidate Rutherford B. Hayes, the White House, in return for Southern Democratic support. I'm going to repeat that. In return for Southern Democratic support of the presidential candidate, Republicans agreed to withdraw federal troops who had been protecting African Americans in the defeated Confederacy. So, in order for the president to get the vote, he had to remove any support that the federal government gave to us, and that was in the form of protection. I think this is a perfect way to open up this chapter, because as we go on to the next couple of pages, we'll see how support was taken away from us in order for us to be kept down and kept away from wealth. The support of the government was removed. So this is a firm example of how the government said, you know what? If you want that seat, Mr. Rutherford Hayes, we had to do something for me. I want you to remove that protection you put on African Americans so we can go ahead and do what we got to do in every state. So that's why I came up with the quote, a change of power came at our expense. So that's why I want
But brother T, let's talk about that Hayes Compromise. And I want to shout out our young people in the building. One of my students from Morgan State University, shout out to the Bears, Nasir Randall. He's taking me for circuits. And I've been telling my students about this book club, and that they just need to just tune in. I said 1 hour, 1 hour on Sunday, tune in to learn something. And so this young man has taken time out of his schedule, because young people could be anywhere, brother T. I've been in some places, okay, you're 21 and 22, been out and about, and so he could be anywhere tonight, but he's with us. And so I want to salute the young warrior, Nasir Randall, who is in the building. He says good evening to all people in the chat. Let's shout him out, the young brother. But anyway, brother T, the Hayes Compromise. And so, like you said, that was the president. What was his first name? Rutherford Hayes, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so that was called the Hayes Compromise, right? So in order for him to get into the White House, they said, like you said, brother T, we got to remove federal support. from black folks. So what was happening? Now, this is post-Civil War. Remember, the Civil War happened between 1861 to 1865. But from 1865 to 1877, we experienced that period of Reconstruction, where we were actually flourishing for once, somewhat. I mean, I have my criticism about Reconstruction as well. But anyway, in that particular era from 1865 to 1877, we were flourishing somewhat, right? Where it's post-slavery, we're building, communities, and we're doing certain things. But this is under the protection, right, of federal troops. But when the Hayes Compromise came about, what happened? Once the federal troops were gone, that's when they brought in Jim Crow, the black codes, right? That's when they really started semi-slavery. They instituted a semi-slavery system all over again. And they terrorized the black community, and black communities were burnt down during this particular time. And black men, women, and children were lynched and hunted and abused during this particular time. So he wanted to get in the office, like you said, Brother T, but at what expense? Our expense. And so I just kind of wanted to reiterate and reinforce the powerful point, Brother T, that you made. And so go ahead, Brother T, continue, or did you want me to pick it up?
This was the systematic stripping of protection of blacks, just as you mentioned, Dr. Ma'at. And I wanted to go on page 40 to continue on what I had highlighted. So when we talk about the period of black liberation, they called it Reconstruction. Like you said, we have doubts about that, came to an end. But it definitely came to an end based off of this Hayes Compromise. In the South, the former slaveholding aristocracy, I can't pronounce the word right now, renewed African-American.
I think it's aristocracy.
The aristocracy. Thank you, Dr. Ma'at. Hold up, let me do that.
You know what, Brother T? Brother T, I butcher words all the time. I know. And look, Crystal Denise she's an educator as well as a librarian. So I know when I butcher words with this Baltimore accent, I know she's sitting there like, oh, Dr. Ma'at is not. I butcher words all the time. It's that Baltimore tongue, man.
In my mind, it was correct. So basically it says that the Reconstruction came to an end in the South. The former slave holding renewed African American segregation, supported by a campaign of violence against the newly emancipated slaves. Southern states adopted segregation statuses such as Jim Crow, as you mentioned, denied the right to vote, segregated in public transportation, schools, and private accommodations, and victimized by lynching and other forms of brutality. African Americans in the South were reduced again to a lower caste status. Plantation owners redefined their former slaves as sharecroppers to maintain a harsh and exploitative conditions. So basically, this was all of the conditions that came after that Hayes Compromise. I just wanted to bring that point home from what you stated, Dr. Ma'at.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you drove it home perfectly. And so they began to terrorize us. Sister Crystal Denise, tell us in the chat, when was the KKK established? I think the KKK was established around that time period, like the 1860s, 1870s, around that time period. And they were, like you said, terrorizing black communities. And so if we continue on page 40, Brother T, he goes into how they didn't want black folks to vote. And they were terrorizing our towns. There were riots where, I don't even want to call it, they called it riots, but I would call it massacres. I think that's a better term, in my opinion, to say that there were massacres that occurred in a particular town. I'm looking at it. It says Hamburg in the District of South Carolina. Their aim was to prevent black folks from voting. So in July of 1876, there was this group of they called them red shirts. It's a collection of white supremacists killed 6 African-American men and murdered 4 others whom the gang had captured. Okay. And it's saying this guy, Benjamin Tillman, was actually, I think he was a senator. He had a 24-year senator, but he was a part of this. He was actually a leader of the red shirts. okay, which is a
Mm-hmm.
collection of white supremacists. And some people may say, well, Dr. Ma, why are y'all talking about white supremacy, in 1876? That's probably what my student Nasir was thinking. We see it today, Brother T, with
Right.
the Proud Boys and the different. We
Wow.
see
That's right.
that. We see so these white supremacist groups that exist today. It's nothing new under the sun. They've always existed. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, that happened. And then it goes on to say that they also formed another organization called the Rifle Club. It says
Mm-hmm.
in September. Okay, so this is 2 months. This is the same year, 1876. 2 months later, it says in September, a rifle club of more than 500 whites crossed the Savannah River from Georgia and camped outside of Hamburg. And so then the rifle club then moved into the nearby hamlet of Ellington, killing as many as 50 African Americans simply
Mm-hmm.
because they did not want us to vote. They didn't want us to vote. And so, I mean, I do understand when the older folks say exercise your right to vote. They say someone died because of, someone died for you to have to exercise that right. That is true, Brother T. I mean, that's true. I mean, we just read it, right? That's true. However, not only did our ancestors die to exercise our right to vote, they also died to be able to be in control of their destiny. And they thought that they could through voting. And so we had to be careful. So I'm not going to use the, oh, someone died, so you better go out here and vote for the lesser of two evils. No, we're not going to do that. When we exercise, we exercise our right to vote. So that means I can do it or I don't have to do it. I just died because our ancestors died because they wanted to be able to do it. The ability, the capacity to do it, right? And so I'm not going to vote for the lesser two evils simply because these massacres are no, 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 no. I'm going to vote for the best interest of my people. And if two of these candidates do not propose an agenda that benefits my people, then they do not have my support, which is my vote, right? And so anyway, I do want to I'd use these passages to give credence that yes, people literally died, like they wanted to prevent us from voting. And so they went into these towns, killed people. Like, no, they didn't want us to vote, right? But that we shouldn't use that to say, okay, well, I'm going to vote for the lesser two evils because I remember back in 1876 when black people were slaughtered because they weren't able to vote. No, no, no. Voting is more than that, and I just kind of wanted to point that out. So anyway, go ahead, Brother T.
That example is early on the first page. How the Republicans needed that federal protection lifted. They was using their power to vote someone in to get what they wanted. And I think that the perfect example is what we heard our last election, how the talks of reparations at least came up. Why? Because people start to ask for certain things. And that's what we have to continue to do if we choose to continue to vote. Vote with a purpose, vote with something in mind. Vote is an exchange. It's not just giving it away for free.
That's
It's
right.
always an exchange for something. So as long as we remember that, we're in the right direction.
Right. Facts. 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 And so he goes on to talk about Tillman. Remember, I said Tillman was a part of he was actually Benjamin Tillman was the head, Brother T, of the Red Shirt, which was a collection of white supremacists. He became a senator and he served as a senator, I think they said for 20 some odd years. But no one was prosecuted for them. They were going around terrorizing black folks and, they were charged. I think it says, they were never prosecuted. Yeah. So it says, the coroner's jury indicted them. So they were indicted, but they were never prosecuted, right? And they continued, to menace African Americans. And it says federal troops never again came to offer any protection. So we were unprotected. And Dr. Claude Anderson talks about that a lot. How we are an unprotected people. And so, if anything, we need to be fighting for policies and laws that protect us, okay, or laws that protect us rather than policy, but laws that actually protect us. And so he says that a statue a statue was created honoring Tillman. It says on the Capitol grounds in South Carolina. In the 1940, state legislature erected a statue honoring Tillman on the Capitol grounds. And in 1946, Clemson, one of the state's public universities, renamed his main hall in Tillman's honor. I wonder, Brother T, because I know for a while they were trying to get rid of like Confederate statues, right? Well, statues of Confederate heroes and other people. So I'm not sure if he was one of the statues that came down. So I wanted to look into it. Actually, put a note right here to look into it because I'm wondering if the statue is still there. But to be honest with you, brother T, I don't care about them removing statues. I know a lot of Black folks. Some people were happy about it, and let them.
Symbolic.
Yeah, it's just symbolic. Yeah, I
Symbolic
don't.
win.
Yeah. It's a symbolic. Okay, you took down the statue, but we're still contending with racism and white supremacy, even though we don't have the statues out there, And so anyway, and I also think it's a way for them to erase what they've done. So they may look at it as, oh, we're just trying to. No, it's kind of. I want that statue there because I want to be able to tell my children and my children's children. They tell their children's children who that person was and what they did to African American people. So for me, I would use that as an opportunity to teach, right? Not to sulk and say, why is the statue still there? Like, no, let's talk about who this man was and what he did to African American people and African American communities. So anyway, the next section, he goes on to talk about, Jim Crow and how it intensified in the South and how fear turned into hatred of African Americans began to spread beyond the region. Okay. It says throughout the country, whites came to assume Black perversity and inferiority. So this is Brother T. Remember, a lot of Black men were being lynched because they were viewed as, sexual predators and promiscuous, and they were preying on white women. Remember, that was the myth that was circulating amongst white people. And salute to our dear sister Ida B. Wells, who started investigating the lynches. And Ida B. Wells said, no. She said, that's not what's going on. She said they're lynching a lot of these Black men due to economic envy, and they didn't want to compete with Black men. It had nothing to do with Black men being sexual predators. It had everything to do with white men not wanting to compete with Black men. But go ahead, Brother T.
And remember the movie that Nate Parker made a remake of, Birth of a Nation. He used the name, talked about Nat. The movie was about Nat Turner, but the Birth of a Nation was one of the first movies played in the White House. And remember the narrative of that movie. That narrative of that movie was that the white woman was the damsel in distress, and she was being attacked by the overly sexual charged Black male. So that was the narrative of that movie. One of the first movies, as I stated before, that was played in the White House. They laid it out and they applauded afterwards, I'm sure. So before we go any further, we talked about how that politicians assisted in the matter, right? I watched something with Abrams. What I think Stacey Abrams.
Yes.
And one thing that I watched on EYL is she was talking about the powers of the governor and how the governor dictates what's going on in the state, right? And on page 40, they talked about a governor. And I put on the side that the governor assisted in the horror. Okay, on this part of the chapter, it says a local judge begged the governor to protect the African American population, but to no avail. The Rifle Club then moved on to nearby hamlet Elton, killing as many as 50 African Americans. President Ulysses S. Grant then sent in the federal troops, who temporarily calmed things down but did not eliminate the ongoing threats. Employers of the federal Edgefield district told African Americans they would be fired, and the landowners threatened Black sharecroppers with eviction if they voted to maintain a biracial state government. When an 1876 election took place, the fraudulent white ballots were cast. The total vote in Edgefield substantially exceeded the entire voting age population. Results like these across the state gave segregationist Democrats the margin of victory they needed to seize control of the South Carolina government from the Black-white coalition. Looking for a reason to destroy is what I put as a quote there. So the coalition that held office during the Reconstruction, let's talk about Senator Tillman, later bragged that the leading white men of Edgefield had decided to seize the first opportunity the Negroes might offer them to provoke a riot to teach the Negroes a lesson. So the thing is, the governor did not offer the support. The federal government said, hey, I'm going to temporarily give them some protection. But then it showed here, I just want to excite a riot. I'm just waiting for a black man or a black woman to do anything so we can destroy him. So you've seen how much horror that they was laying out on our ancestors at this time. They just wanted to find any reason to destroy the city, destroy any footing that they may have. And once again, at our expense, and also after the federal government removed protection. It didn't matter. So it's just another reason that we have to look and pay attention to the climate that we're in, even today.
Hold on. You say even today? Hold on, brother T. You know I gotta find it now. Hold on. Even today, brother T.
To this day. To this day.
Most definitely. Even to the day.
Even to today, brother T. You know when we say to this day.
Every time I hear it, I see him. I see that intensity every time I hear that quote.
Save here. Shout out to Saint Sincere. He said, I'm reading The Color of Money now, and it shows how white supremacist policies and terrorism deliberately retarded black economic progress and created slums. Yes, Saint Sincere, check out the book club. We just that was the book we read. I think that was like not last book. That was Booker T, the book before our last book. We've read The Color of Money. So check out those discussions, Saint Sincere, when you get an opportunity, brother. But glad you're reading that book. But yeah, brother T. And so after that, remember, it goes into it. I'm at the bottom of page 41 where he says they began to gradually remove African Americans from certain communities, right? So he says that, okay, it says, consider a state seemingly improbable as Montana, where African Americans thrived in the post-Civil War years. In the early 1900s, they were systematically expelled from predominantly white communities in that state. So there were black people, right, living in pockets of white communities. Okay. And so after the Civil War, they said, we're going to get these folks out of here. And they gradually removed us. And so he's given us an example. He started talking about Helena, Montana, and how at one point, they had a large number of African Americans like living in this particular community. And brother T, when I thought about this community, I thought about Tulsa, because he says in the middle of page 42, they had a thriving AME church. It said the city had black newspapers, black-owned businesses, and a black literary society that sometimes drew 100 attendees to hear presentations by poets, playwrights, and essayists. So it was a thriving black community, like another Tulsa. We always hear Tulsa. Whenever they talk about thriving black communities, people prop up Tulsa. But what people don't understand, that it was hundreds of thriving black communities. Texas alone had 552 they called them freedom colonies, post-slavery. 552 freedom colonies were in Texas alone. All right. Even in Baltimore was nicknamed Freedom Port because remember, it had a huge number of free black people living in communities right here in Baltimore. And so anyway, in Baltimore County had a lot of thriving black towns right here in Baltimore. And so anyway, I just know a lot of people prop up when you say it was a thriving black community, Tulsa, Rosewood, yes. And it's like, wait a minute, there were hundreds of them, right? And so Helena was one of them. But what happened? He says at the top, African-American population of Helena, the state capital of Montana, it peaked at 420 in 1910. It was down by 131 by 1930. And only 45 remained by 1970. It says by 2010, the 113 African Americans in Helena comprised less than half of 1% of the city's population. And so what was happening? Zoning, not even just zoning, these sundown towns. Remember, he talks about that in the middle
Yes.
of page 42. He talks about how sundown towns, how like white folks are putting up signs. We don't want black people here when the sun go down. If the sun goes down, and then he said at one point, I think I'm looking at it right now, said it was someone put a sign up that said basically the sun won't set on a nigger something. It was something he said. I gotta look for it. But
Yeah.
yeah, it says oh, here it is. Here it is. Go ahead, go ahead. I don't got it. Where is it, brother?
Okay. At the bottom, it's on the last paragraph. It says it noted that the town's policy was that the sun is never allowed to set on any niggers in Glendale.
Yes. So let me highlight that. Yep. And so a lot of towns, you know, that's where you hear these terms sundown towns. So black folks better not be there when the sun go down. I remember my grandmother told me John Hopkins in that particular area where John Hopkins was. It's like areas because my grandmother, she lived over in West Baltimore for some years. Then she moved from West Baltimore to East Baltimore. But she was saying in certain areas in East Baltimore near John Hopkins, you better not go there when the sun goes down. And this is my grandmother telling me this when I was in my early 20s, which she experienced, you know, living in Baltimore. So Baltimore had sundown towns as well, you know, right here in Baltimore, there's places in the city you better not go, you know, when that sun went down, you know. And so she talked about that to me. But anyway, moving forward, he gives us a bunch of examples. Go ahead, brother.
Did you see the part in on page 42 when it says, but in 1906, Helena's prosecuting attorney expressed the new attitude of public authorities when he announced it's time that the respectable white people of this community rise in their might and assert their rights. I call that evoke of their white privileges.
That's
right. You know what I'm saying? At that time, it's amazing that people said this stuff in the public, but today they are like absent, or they can't remember what white privilege is.
Right.
Anytime a person can scream that it's time for the respectable white people of this community to rise in their might and assert their rights, come on now, that's what they call white privilege. And at that time, they were really ready to do you stated early, create the sundown towns. You know?
I gotta write this down. But sister Crystal said the statue was removed. She said she said, but the hall was still named after Tillman. I'm writing this down in my book. Thank you so much. She's as a researcher right there, honey. A researcher, educator. So she was on it. But yeah, brother T. So the sundown towns. And then he moves into talking about the Woodrow Wilson, how he was elected as president in 1912. And it says, although he had served as president of Princeton University in New Jersey and then the government of the state, his origins were the South. He was an uncompromising believer in segregation and black inferiority. All right. And so remember, he started implementing, it says right here, he approved the implementation of segregation in government offices. Okay. It says curtains were installed to separate black and white electrical workers. Oh, man. It says, this is electrical? Lyrical. I'm sorry. A lyrical. I probably butchered that. But it says separate cafeterias were created. So he was a staunch supporter of segregation, and he did it on a government level, right? And so hold on. He did it on a government level. Hold on. So I want to see. And he does mention in this section Franklin D. Roosevelt. All right. Yes. So he's saying that it's Delano. I'm saying Delano. That's how we pronounce it in my family. My father was named in honor of Franklin D. Roosevelt. My grandmother Myrtle Bailey named my father, whose name is Delano Saili Bailey, after President Roosevelt. She loved President Roosevelt. So some people say Delano, but we say Delano. That's how we. Maybe that might be in the black community, but we say Delano. But but Franklin D. Roosevelt. It says that right here. I found this not strange, but I know how black folks loved him, even though he passed a lot of policies that hurt us. Ricard Rothstein says, Roosevelt, it says one official responsible for implementing segregation was the assistant secretary of the Navy. So I didn't even know he was ever assistant. I know he became the president, but I didn't know at one time he was the assistant secretary of the Navy. It says Franklin Roosevelt, right? He might or may not have been enthusiastic about segregation, but it was an aspect of the changing national political culture in which he matured and that he did not challenge. So he wasn't a warrior for black folks, even though black folks loved him. And he, his mantra was like the whole poor people movement, right? Like, this is the poor people. I'm the poor people's president. But he wasn't really for poor people, Brother T, not at all. Maybe poor whites, but and making sure they were okay, but not for poor blacks. And so go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, finish your point.
No, I finished.
Okay, and I wanted to talk about the president, Woodrow Wilson. Exactly, we just talked about Roosevelt, but we talked about how people get in positions, and as they move up, they carry that same stigma and bias with them. And Woodrow Wilson was also a president at Princeton University, and as it stated here, for about 8 years. And through his presidency there, he made sure that it was not many blacks were able to come to that university. So he even had segregation there. He didn't want many blacks come on his presidency, and that's listed out. I did some more research on that. So then remember, he also became governor of New Jersey. So you can only imagine that he takes that same mindset for the 2 years he was there before he became president. These guys are sought after. He was sought after he was the president of of Princeton. He was sought after to be the governor. Then people looked out for him and also voted for him to be a president. So you gotta understand, these people start at these positions. Like Roosevelt started in the Navy. These guys carry their bias. So can you only imagine how hard they made it before they got to the president stage? They were known that they had these policies in place, that they would not be kind to blacks. So Woodrow Wilson followed suit from the presidency of Princeton University to the governor of New Jersey in the 4 years he was in the White House.
Right. Facts, Brother T. And so on page 44, he moves into talking about how we were driven out because of zoning rules. So he gets into these different zoning rules, and he said the first to do it was where, Brother T? Where was the first to do it?
Baltimore.
The zoning laws, it started in Baltimore, just like redlining started in Baltimore. So he tells us in the middle of page 44, the first to do so. So hold on, let's back up. It says that African Americans were being driven out of smaller Midwestern and Western communities like those in Montana. We talked about Helena. It says many other cities, particularly in the southern and border states, already had large black populations that couldn't be expelled, right? So it says right here, and so people were being driven out. They're like, get out. They're being terrorized. You got the Sundown town. So black folks are being driven out. But there were cities where you had large black populations that just could not be expelled. So it says instead, many of these cities adopted zoning rules, decreeing separate living areas for black and white families. So glad I went back and read that, because I want to make sure that when I'm giving out information that, that is proper, that is right and exact. And so glad I went back to read that. So that's where the zoning rules came from. So the zoning rules were created because hold on, wait a minute. This population is large. We can't just scare them out, so we had to do more. Now we got to go the political route, right? So when terror doesn't work, now let's weaponize the law, right? Let's weaponize policies. Let's weaponize laws, right? To get them out of here. And so it says zoning rules, then decreed separate living areas for black and white families. So the first to do so was Baltimore. So it says, which in 1910, adopted an ordinance prohibiting African Americans from buying homes on blocks where whites were a majority and vice versa. Let me say something. So I remember my cousins came out from California because one of my uncles in the 1980s, he left Baltimore. He migrated to, I think Sacramento initially, may have been Sacramento or Hayward, but he left, Brother T, in like the 80s. This is my eldest uncle who was born in 51 or 1950, but in the 80s, like in his 30s, he was like, I'm out of here. I'm leaving. So he went to California. He ended up getting married and having children there. And then once he got established out there, he brought in another uncle who went out there, got married, and had children. So that's why I have family in California, right?
Okay.
So anyway, I remember that side of the family came to visit us in Baltimore, some years ago. And my cousin, she said, "Oh my goodness, it's so segregated out here." She said, the only area that wasn't as segregated was Columbia. Like when I took them out Columbia, Maryland, it was very mixed. But other than that, when I took them in Baltimore, and this was, like I said, years ago, it was very segregated. White people lived here, black people live here. But now we see why, right? There were actual zoning decrees or zoning rules that determined the racial demographic of different areas, right? And in Baltimore. And so now we know what it was for. So anyway, he goes on to talk about Milton the Shield, and says that he was a lawyer from Baltimore who actually drafted Baltimore's ordinance. And listen to what he said. He said, "Ordinarily, the Negro loves to gather himself, for he is very gregarious and sociable in his nature. But those who have risen somewhat above their fellows appear to have an intense desire to leave them behind, to disown them as if it were, and get as close to the company of white people as circumstances will permit them." He said this in 1910, Brother T. But when I read that quote, I thought about black folks today. How we want, as soon as we get something, we want to be right under white folks. But he recognized this almost over 100 years ago, saying, wait a minute. I did notice that black folks typically like to be with black folks, but it's some that feel like they're doing better. And so they want to come over here with us, right? They want to come over here with us. But don't we see that, Brother T, in our black celebrities? And I'm not saying that it's nothing wrong with, you're getting a couple of dollars and you're saying, hey, I want a certain quality of life, right? But a lot of them forget, and some people may say, Dr. Ma, how you don't know what they do with their money? Hell, if those celebrities were pulling together their resources for the betterment of black community, our conditions, we will be able to see that, Brother T. We will be able to see Jay-Z using his billions and Kanye and all these. We would see that. We don't have a model black community right now that we can look to and say, oh man, we control the businesses, the dollar circulates, we control the school. We don't have that. So miss me with you don't know what the black celebrities are doing with their money. Because if they were pooling their money together and actually investing in black communities, we would see that. And I'm talking about, we would see that. We would see the businesses, we would see the schools, we would see the quality, the condition, not the quality, but the condition of these areas change. But the reality is, Brother T, when black folks get a piece of change, we start thinking we better than the next person. And it don't even have to be change, Brother T. It could be your educational level. See, I'm getting ready to spill some beans in my family. I don't even want to go there, but my family who's watching, they know who I'm talking about. We get a piece of education, Brother T, and now you think you're better than the next person because you have a PhD, because you have a master's degree, because you have a BS. And I'm being smart when I say a BS degree. Then we want to move with the white folks. We want to get closer to the white folks. But white folks knew this about us back in the early 1900s. So he's saying, you know what? We're going to draft up these zoning rules for you, right? To keep your ass out of our neighborhoods. But go ahead, Brother T.
Now you're on point. Continue to light that fire, Dr. Micah. Go ahead.
Right, so look, I had to highlight that. Initially, I didn't have it highlighted what he said, but it's true. That what he said, and I just want to read it again. He said, ordinarily, the Negro loves to gather to himself, for he is very gregarious and sociable in his nature. But those who have risen somewhat above their fellows appear to have an intense desire to leave them behind. Woo! To leave them behind, to disown them as if it were, and get as close to the company of white people as circumstances will permit them. He said that in 1910, Brother T. Yeah. And we see this attitude in Negroes till this day. Hold on.
This day. To this day. To this day.
To this day, Brother T. I'm like, man, come on, man. So anyway, he moves on to talk about that ordinance in Baltimore. It says eventually the ordinance was revisited so that it applied only to blocks that were entirely white or black, leaving Baltimore's integrated blocks unaffected. So initially, with the ordinance, it was saying, hold on, it was prohibiting African Americans from buying homes on blocks where whites were the majority and vice versa. But it says that it was revised so that, okay, if the block was entirely white, then blacks couldn't buy in, or if the block was entirely black, whites couldn't buy in. And it says that other southern and border cities follow Baltimore, adopting similar zoning rules. So Atlanta, Birmingham, Dade County, and Miami, Charleston, Dulles, Louisville, New Orleans, Oklahoma City, Richmond, St. Louis, and others. And it says few northern cities did so before the Great Migration, stimulated by the First World War. Most northern urban black populations were still small. Nonetheless, support for these segregation ordinance was widespread amongst white political and opinion leaders. And so, Brother T, I want you to break down the Buchanan decision, right? Because ultimately, you had local officials, right, or federal officials began to change how they structured these zoning rules due to this very this court case, Buchanan versus Warley, which is at the bottom of page 45. And so, based on that decision, remember, when we create these zoning rules or zoning laws, we can no longer say we can't use race, because now we know that violates the 14th Amendment. So now we got to make it seem like it's more economical than racial. But I want you to break down that decision, Brother T.
Okay. Purge the feelings for each other. I cannot go past this. I think we were discussing this prior to us starting the show. I want to show how sinister it was with this zoning before we go into this case, and I think it was set the stage.
Okay.
On page 45 is the second paragraph, and it starts stating that how many southern and border cities followed Baltimore and adopted similar zoning rules. Atlanta, Birmingham, Dade County, Miami, Charleston, Dallas, Louisville, New Orleans, Oklahoma, Richmond, St. Louis, and a few northern cities did so. Before the Great Migration, stimulated by the First World War, most northern urban black populations were still small. But nonetheless, support for these segregation ordinances was widespread among white political and opinion leaders. But in 1915, the New York Republic, still in its infancy, but already an influential magazine, a progressive movement, argued that residential racial segregation, until Negroes ceased wanting to amalgamate with whites, which is to say, cease wanting to engage in relationships that produce mixed race children. I wanted to make that point was because they seen that black and whites wanting to get together, but they created this zoning in these cities that I mentioned earlier, and they believed this publication stated that if we create this zoning, hopefully we can keep them from getting in relationship with each other and creating mixed race children. So zoning was deeper than just what we stated of keeping the wealth away. They wanted to make sure that our families did not even cross. So Dr. Ma'at mentioned earlier on how the politician stated that he thought that blacks wanted to stay with blacks. It was them softening the stage to say that, hey, we're going to go to a point to start this zoning to make sure they don't even get together in relationships and produce any offspring. So we have to make sure we make that point because it was on this page. So in 1917, the Supreme Court overturned the racial zoning ordinances of Louisville. Kentucky, where many neighborhoods included both races before the 20th century segregation. In the case of Buchanan, and Warley involved an African American attempt to purchase property on the integrated block where already 2 black and 8 white households. The court majority was enamored of the idea that a central purpose of the 14th Amendment was not to protect the rights of freed slaves, but a business rule. So the freedom of contract. Relying on this interpretation, the court has struck down the minimum wage and workplace safety laws and the grounds that they interfered with the right to work and business owners to negotiate individual employment conditions without government interference. Similarly, the court ruled that the racial zoning ordinances interfered with the right of property owner to sell whoever he pleased. So they wanted to use that 14th Amendment law in order to sell their property to whoever they wanted to sell it to. Dr. Mott, you want to break that down a little bit more?
No, I think that I think that was the Buchanan. I'm pronouncing
Buchanan decision.
Yeah, but that was the Buchanan decision. And so remember, people started challenging, and I mean, in the subsequent pages, I don't have to read every case, every court case, but I can tell you, in places like I'm sorry, Indianapolis, Richmond, Virginia on one page, Birmingham, and in Florida, in Orlando, and Austin, and Atlanta, and different places, Kansas City, and Norfolk. A lot of people, started challenging these ordinances and based on the Buchanan decision. And I'm talking about Brother T from page 45 all the way to page 48, right? And so you had people saying, the ones who were for not racial zoning, but for zoning rules, people who were for zoning rules, they were saying, look, man, they were arguing that we need to keep these races separate. People, black and white people aren't ready to live together, right? They just simply aren't ready to
Racial
live together.
harmony,
Yeah, they weren't. Black and white people aren't, they aren't ready for that. And I'm thinking about this guy at the top, page 46, Robert Whiting, who said that he was a one of the nation's most prominent city planners. He wrote a zone plan, and he said the zone plan drafted by Whitten and published by the Atlantic City Planning Commission in 1952 explained that race zoning is essential in the interest of public peace, order, and security, and will promote the welfare and prosperity of both the white and colored race. The zoning law divided the city. So he going into the R1 district, which was the white districts. R2 district was the colored district. It says with additional neighborhoods undetermined. But anyway, that was his premise for, creating, the zoning plan that he did. He's like, we got to keep them together. You know what I mean? For peace and for order and for security. And so anyway, in the subsequent pages, family, the author Ricard Rothstein is talking about how people challenged, the zoning rules or the ordinances based on the Buchanan decision. And Brother T, we see that in some cases the Supreme Court, they went against it. They went against it, and sometimes they upheld, what the people wanted. So the court, sometimes they were for, sometimes they wouldn't. And so what happened was that they began to get a little savvy, Brother T. They said, hold on, wait a minute. So we can't use race anymore, because as soon as we use race, it goes to the Supreme Court and they throw it out, right? They declare these zoning rules as unconstitutional and they throw them out. So now we got to think of a way to circumvent that. And so what they began doing was they implemented economic zoning as opposed to race zoning. So instead of creating these race zones, right, they said we're going to create economic zones. And so we're going to ensure that neighborhoods are exclusively white by making sure that that neighborhood is categorized a certain type of way. And they use what they call in the book, I think he called it Euclidean zoning. All right. Did he call it Euclidean? I think it's called the Euclidean zoning. And so with Euclidean zoning, let me share my screen. Euclidean zoning. All right. It says, I'm looking for what I want. Okay. Typical types of land use district in Euclidean zoning are residential, commercial, and industrial. Okay. So those were the the actual categories, right, Brother T? Okay, where you had, they were saying they were doing economic zoning, and they were saying, okay, we can either raise the price or we could just use these categories, right? And what they did in order to keep the white neighborhoods exclusively white, they just labeled it residential. But the places where they had black folks, they labeled it commercial or industrial. So, Brother T, I remember when I was younger, and I don't know if I was watching a Spike Lee movie or not. I want to say it was one of Spike Lee movies, and they were, why is a liquor store on every corner? Why is it this on every corner? And they said it was all by design, but that was true. There was a lot of truth in those statements, right? To say, why do we see liquor stores and apartment buildings, and because of because of the zone planning for this particular area. So you go out to white neighborhoods, you don't see the liquor stores, right? Because the white neighborhoods were declared residential. So you couldn't go to the white neighborhoods and put apartments there, and liquor stores and bars and red light districts. You couldn't do that to them. But our neighborhoods were declared as commercial or industrial. And so you could come in and build liquor stores and put nightclubs there and put red light districts there, right? And so you could do that. And so no wonder when you go through, when you get to our neighborhoods, you see stores, you see a lot of stores, you see a lot of bars, you see different things because of because they declared our stuff industrial. But go ahead, Brother T. I know you want to chime in.
Yeah. Everything you said is on point, and it goes through the next couple pages that we've written. What you was discussing was on page 50, when they said when they created parks and playground on industrial areas, and it just goes on to play back on page 49 is when it said if a neighborhood was covered with single family houses with deeds that prohibited African Americans from occupancy. This was taken into consideration at Plan Commission meetings and made it almost certain that the neighborhood would be zoned first residential, prohibiting future construction of anything but single family units and helping to preserve its all white character. So, like you said, it's all about preserving the whiteness and the wealth in that area, right? So, on page 50, it goes on what you were speaking of, Dr. Ma'at. In 1927, violating its normal policy, the commission authorized a park and playground in the industrial, not residential area, in hopes that it would draw African American families to seek housing nearby. Similar decision-making continued through the middle of the 20th century. In 1942, meeting commissioners explained that they were zoning an area in a commercial strip of the multi-family because it could then develop into a favorable dwelling district for colored people. So as you see, as you stated, Dr. Ma'at, it's documented on how they kept us away from the better lands and the better homes by putting us near industrial parts. And we know that the industrial parts here in Baltimore is where all the businesses are, and also where most of the pollutants are. So, which we would get more of the health issues and that's another reason why our homes are valued less, because where they're built on, right? So I put that allowing polluting and liquor stores in our communities, as you already mentioned. So he definitely spread that all through page 50. So we went through all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he summed it up pretty good.
And then, Brother T, I was sitting here thinking about how, remember when we were reading The Color of Money, and Darren mentioned, and I probably butchered her last name, by the way, but Darren mentioned, she mentioned, I think we jacked her name up, Brother T, bad. We could call her Mercia. We called everything Mershra, Darren. But anyway, I know she's a woman from India. She's a woman from India. But anyway, she did a marvelous job. But when we were reading The Color of Money, she talked about a town in North Carolina called Haiti. Haiti. And it was named in honor of the country Haiti, all right, or I-A-T. And so she said that the town was destroyed because the government put a highway through it. Remember, they decided to put a highway through it. But you know why they were able to do that? Because of how it was zoned. It more than likely is a black town. So it's zoned as either commercial or industrial. So hey, it wasn't labeled as as residential. So then we can create a highway, through there. I'm sitting here thinking about my father right now when he talked about, how, Brother T, when you drive up Emerson Avenue, let's say that you're coming from like Catonsville in the county, you're driving up Emerson Avenue, you keep on going down. There is a train track right there on your left side, and then there's like an underpass, like a highway that goes nowhere. Literally, it's a highway that goes nowhere but downtown. And so, but think about it. How are they able to create? This is a Black community in West Baltimore. They have a highway going through it that goes nowhere, Brother T. It goes to downtown Baltimore, and that's it. It's not like it's a highway that takes you, to DC or takes you to New York,
right?
Or takes you to Delaware. It's literally a highway they built in the middle of the Black community that goes nowhere. Why were they able to do it? Because the Black community there, that area there, was more than likely zoned as a commercial or an industrial. But when I read this, I said, oh, my mind went right back to The Color of Money. And I said, okay, they were able to run or to create a highway through Haiti, North Carolina, because that area was zoned or categorized as a commercial or industrial area. So anyway, Brother T, like you said, he goes on to talk about different people who played a role in this whole racial segregation. Talks about at the top of page 51, 1921, and we're winding down, family. 1921, President Warren Harding, Secretary of Commerce, Herbert Hoover, organized an advisory committee on zoning to develop a manual explaining why every municipality, should develop a zoning ordinance. All right. The advisory committee distributed thousands of copies to officials nationwide. Okay. So it's saying that the manual did not give the creation of racially homogenous neighborhoods as the reason for why zoning should become such an important priority for cities, but the advisory was composed of outspoken segregationists whose speeches and writings demonstrated that race was one basis of their zoning advocacy. So he mentions Frederick Law Olmsted. Okay. He mentions Alfred Bettman, or Bateman. Okay. And then it says, going on to page 52, in 1924, 2 years after the advisory committee had published its first manual and model zoning ordinance, the association followed up by adopting a code of ethics that included this warning: a realtor should never be instrumental in introducing into a neighborhood members of any race or nationality whose presence will clearly be detrimental to property values in that neighborhood, right? And so they had a code of ethics that went along with this manual. See, in order for white supremacy to work, it has to be a system. That's why I love, shout out to Dr. Nellie Fuller, when he talked about racism or racism and white supremacy as a system. So everybody had to be involved. Everybody had to be involved. You get what I'm saying? To make this thing really work. Even the damn realtors, Brother T, had to be involved. All right. And so he goes on to now mention Columbia Law School professor Ernest Friand, I guess. It says that he said preventing the coming of colored people into a district was actually a more powerful reason for the spread of zoning during the previous decade than creation of single-family districts. The stated justification for zoning, it says, because the Buchanan decision had made it impossible to find an appropriate legal formula for segregation, Friand said that zoning masquerading as an economic measure was the most reasonable means by accomplishing the same end. All right. And so again, family, this is just reiterating that, okay, the Buchanan decision made it hard for them to zone people or zoning rules based on race. So they based it on other things. They based it on economics. They based it on these categories, right? Residential, commercial, and industrial. Okay. Because they couldn't just say, we don't want you here because you're Black, right?
Right.
So
gotta
then
keep it hush hush.
Gotta keep it hush hush. So he goes on to talk about these. There's a couple of cases. He mentions a Supreme Court case in 1926. All right. And another one in 1970. Yep, and another one in 1977. So these are people who are challenging it, and I think that they uphold it, brother T. Let me look at the conclusion. 1926. Bop, 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 bop. That they but could not pretend ignorance true a violation. Okay, so the court in 1926, they did says for the first time considered the constitutionality of zoning rules that prohibited apartment buildings. Okay, so these white folks didn't want apartment buildings in their single family neighborhoods, and the Supreme Court ruled that it violated the Buchanan decision. All right. So they actually allowed it. But then it said about in 1970, Oklahoma case, there was a segregated town of Lawson. They refused to permit a multi-unit development in the all-white neighborhood. And it says, I think it got challenged and they didn't allow it then. But it says in 1977, the Supreme Court upheld a zoning ordinance in Arlington Heights, which is a suburb in Chicago. So, yeah. So people challenged this over the years, and sometimes the Supreme Court would allow apartments or different things to get built there, and some wouldn't. When I thought about that, when I read that, Brother T, I thought about what you shared with me about what was the comedian name? Dave Chappelle.
Dave Chappelle.
And you were saying how they wanted to put was it Section 8 or something in his neighborhood, or
they wanted to put affordable housing in his neighborhood in Ohio, is what we found out. And what it was, he had some plans with his development company to put a couple million, tens of millions of dollars in his community. And what they did is voted it out. And he stated, if you want me to continue with my plans, I think you should take heed to what we are saying right now. We don't want that right now in our community. What I think he probably wanted to create some comedy shows, some restaurants along this thing. But these wasn't cheap homes, and compared to Baltimore, these homes like $300,000 plus. So he shut that down, and I don't know how successful he was. I didn't go back to do any research, but he did stand up towards the community and their planning to put those homes there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, I mean, Brother T, do you think he had a point? Because knowing what we know now, had they have done that, I mean, I kind of see it now, so they bring in these affordable houses or homes. And then what happens? Well, white flight is going to happen. Okay. White flight is going to occur. So then white folks are going to start moving out. Property values are then going to fall. Right. And then we start moving in. So then if he invested in this area millions of dollars, he loses. So I'm just trying to, what are your thoughts on this?
As you see, as we talked about in previous chapters, blacks being a contagion of wealth. When it comes down to, and we look at this, the theme of this is that when blacks move in, whites move out, just as you said. So it looks about the value of what that investment would be. And he probably said, hey, putting these homes here, they didn't state who were moving in these homes or who these homes were for. Just the simple fact of having affordable homes would bring less value, as he probably believed in his investment. So going by how this chapter was read about the zoning, now we see why residential, industrial, what would happen if they move plans, what would happen to their investments. It would definitely decrease. So I learned a lot from this, just from seeing how the zone and industrial. You opened my eyes to that. Just as when you stated, I didn't even get it when I read it. Like, wow, that's why they were able to do so much. Put those traffic through our communities, because how they zoned it.
Absolutely.
Did not even put that connection together.
Exactly. And so, Brother T, I do want to, because we're at the end of the chapter now, where he talks about how the black neighborhoods, because of the way they were zoned as commercial and industrial, you had a lot of different uncontrolled waste dumps, different, I'm trying to look for what he called them.
Yes, that's
incinerators in the Black community, right? And so I'm at the bottom of page 54 where it says, you know, it says the use of industrial, even toxic waste zoning to turn African American neighborhoods into slums was not restricted to St. Louis. It became increasingly common as the 20th century proceeded and manufacturing operations grew in urban areas. The pattern was confirmed in a 1983 analysis by the U.S. General Accounting Office, concluding that across the nation, commercial waste treatment facilities or uncontrolled waste dumps were more likely to be found near African American than white residential areas. He says that there was only a 1 in 10,000 chance of the racial distribution of such cities occurring randomly, and that the percentage of minorities living near incinerators was 89% higher than the national medium.
wow.
So, Brother T, they will put dumps in our neighborhoods. You know, I remember reading, this was years ago, and Sister Crystal Denise, I know she probably said, I'm not your secretary, Dr. Mine, but I'm not your administrative assistant. But Sister Crystal Denise, tell me in the chat if you could put a link. There was an article, and shout out to Shemsu Netcha. He's in the building. Shemsu, you need to get back on this panel, brother. We would love to have you. But there was an article that I read years ago, Brother T, about a few black communities who were they were living by power lines, or where like the electricity power plants were located, and a lot of people were catching cancer, and a lot of black people were dying from cancer in this particular community. And they were saying, well, that's because we live right by the power lines, or right by the power plant, and we think that this is causing cancer among our people. Well, they were there, Brother T, because their area was zoned for commercial or industrial purposes. So they would put the plants and the dumps right in the black community. So when they talk about this was all by design.
That's right.
It literally was all by design. Everything. And I know my student probably said, Dr. Bailey told me she was only going to be an hour. It's been an hour and 17 minutes. But look, I just want to drive this home, Brother T, that it is by design. The black neighborhoods that we see, the liquor store on every corner, the clubs, right? The way, the dumps, right? Think about where the dumps are located, Brother T. Right in Baltimore City, right? They take all the dumps is right there. It was all by design, zone planning, which was carried out by segregationists.
Yes.
That's what we're dealing with, and that's why we see what we see today. And that's why I said it's important for young people, Brother T, to be a part of these discussions and to tune into these discussions, so that you're not walking around with blinders on. When you walk around in Baltimore, you see certain things for a reason, and now you know why. It's important to know why things are, so that you can fix them, so that you can be a part of the solution and not the damn problem. Brother T, did you want to continue? Did you want to add?
Want to thank Gail at Night for doing a fantastic job and dropping them links. I think I've been seeing links dropped all night.
Shout out.
Appreciate their hard work. I found that passage you started off, Dr. Ma, and I thought it was fitting to kind of end the show with until we start talking about the last couple of minutes. Is when the frequent existence of pollutant industry and toxic waste plants in African American communities, along with subdivided homes and rooming houses, contributed to giving African Americans the image of slum dwellers in the eyes of whites who lived in neighborhoods where integration might be a possibility. This in turn contributed to white flight when African Americans attempted to move to the suburbs. Zoning thus had two faces. One face developed in part to evade prohibition on racially explicit zoning, attempted to keep African Americans out of white neighborhoods by making it difficult for lower income families, large numbers of whom were African Americans, to live in expensive white neighborhoods. The other attempted to protect white neighborhoods from deterioration by ensuring that few industrial or environmental unsafe businesses could locate in them. Prohibited in this fashion, polluting industry had no option but to locate near African American residents. The first contributed to creation of exclusive white suburbs, the second to creation of urban African American slums. So when someone tells you that blacks, they live in slums, they're nasty, they don't care about the community, I want you to remember this one reading is that it was by design. All of the resources were taken out that could even help the black community to maintain. We talked about that in the previous chapter, how the projects, when the whites lived in it, was maintained by federal funding. When whites moved out to get funding to go to new homes and to build the suburbs, the funding stopped and it was sold to private companies. We were left to fend for ourselves. So if we don't understand that we're still in that same fight today, that we have to find out ways to take care of ourselves, we have to understand this. And this should be at the dinner table when we sit down and plan our next moves. We have to talk about this on a daily basis. That it was by design that we were left to fend for ourselves.
By design.
This day, to this day, to this day.
But all right, so that's the chapter, family. I'm getting ready to drop the link in the chat. 10 minutes, just come in and share your thoughts. Brother T and I've been on for 1 hour and 20, so 10 minutes. If you want to come in and share your thoughts on what you heard, all right, on what you heard, come through. All right, I just dropped the link in the chat. Oh, yeah, Shamsu, I'm aware. He said Annapolis was a major slave port. Absolutely. And Eastern Shore was too, right? They had them out right out Maryland, Eastern Shore. All right. I'm waiting for you all to come on in. Share your thoughts. Brother Shamsu, come on in, man. Share your. He said, I love the separation. We have that in Detroit. Oh, man. Oh, bad. Come on in, family. If you want to share your thoughts, I dropped the link in the chat. If not, Brother T and I close out. We give him a couple minutes, a minute or two, Brother T, to come on in. But shout out to the 70,000 people watching. Shout out. Awesome. Shout out. We'll be back live again. No doubt. Yeah.
We applaud you all. You're coming in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we'll be back live next week to talk about discuss chapter 4. All right. To discuss chapter 4. We'll be back. I'm actually going to be live on Fox Soul on Tuesday.
Oh, okay. They welcome you back?
They welcome me back. So I'm going to be back live on Tuesday. And the question, Tuesday, family, at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We should do a watch party. I think I'm going to do a watch party on Tuesday.
I'll be at work, but I'll be there watching for sure.
Yeah, I think I'll do a watch party on Tuesday, go live, and we can watch it together. But the question is, Brother T, the question is, what was the question? He asked me, oh, do black people need white people to succeed? And he already knew my answer when he called me, when one of the producers of the show called me. He said, well, we knew you were going to argue that you don't. Absolutely. We don't. Now, if we want reparations, right? If we want full and complete integration, then yeah, we would need white people to buy into that. But if we are talking about, operating as a nation within a nation, and trying to build our own, I don't feel like we do need them to be successful. But if you want to be integrated, then yeah, you do need white folks. You do need white folks to co-sign that. You need them to support that. But if you're just talking about, you want to build, I don't know, Brother T, because my whole thing is you could build something here, but then if you don't have no political power, the next it's a highway being ran through your neighborhood. So so successful here, or you get what I'm saying? So that question is kind of loaded, and I'm gonna really think about that, but I would say no. I would definitely say
Right.
no.
No,
And
definitely
yeah,
no.
definitely no. But we got to unpack that. What does black folks mean to succeed? To succeed where? And how? And you understand, like those questions have to be answered. You saying to succeed
Right.
in America? Or where are you saying that? Because you could, like, I had to get on a few young brothers. Dr. Mod, we can just build our own here. Yeah, we can. We absolutely can. And I'm all for that. But do we have the political power and the economic power to sustain that? You get what I'm saying? We could build it. We've done it. We have the history of it. We've done it. But then when they're ready to come in and build a highway, you're done because you don't have any political power.
We've
Right?
seen examples of this page after page after page. So
Over and over again.
Yes.
And this is not to say that we can't. We have and we can. But so anyway, yeah, I don't think we need those people to succeed. I know if you're talking about reparations and you want to be repaired, yeah, you're gonna need because if white folks don't sign off on that, it's not happening. So are you saying in that capacity succeed? I think I need them to clarify what they need. What do they mean by succeed? And doing what? Doing what? Because for me, I'm talking about liberation and sovereignty, and I don't need no damn white people, for that. I don't need no white folks for that. But if you're talking about to succeed, I don't know, economically and politically here, then yeah, you are gonna need some white folks. But if you're talking about, something else, then no. So it just depends. And I can't wait to get on the panel because there's going to be a few black people arguing that we need white folks. But of course, they programmed us to feel like we need them. It's just this dependency that we have on white folks, like children almost. And you got some black folks who just can't shake that. And so anyway, Brother T, so no one has come on. Do you have any closing words for the listening audience?
Thank you so much, family, for coming in for another Sunday. I really love this chat because when we have members in the chat, they're active in sharing ideas, their thoughts, adding on to helping us out, even while we are reading the book and we're talking to you. So I love that this chat is very interactive, and I appreciate you coming out another Sunday.
All right, and look, the young warrior now he said this was great. Thank you. I'm glad you joined, brother, and hope you come back next week. All right. Hope you come back next week. Oh, my brother is in the building. Finesse DJ King Freeman is in the building. Peace to you, King. That's my warrior right there, my bro. Awesome. I remember when I was younger, he told me I was poor. I was mad. He said, we poor people, right? But he was telling me the truth. I was like, what do you mean we poor people? I'm living in Woodlawn with a house in a front yard and backyard. What do you mean we poor? He was like, I bet you your mom didn't outright buy that house. I bet you she got a mortgage on that house. He said, I bet you she got a car payment too. He was saying how, he said, if we were rich, people I never, and that's probably like, how does she remember that conversation? I was young too. I was like a teenager, going to Woodlawn. I was in high school. And he was like, he said, rich people, they just buy things. He was like, they buy things. They take their debit card and swipe. They don't take out loans for cars. They don't take out loans and mortgages for houses. They just swipe and buy them, and that's the first time, Brother T, that I began to look at my economic situation when he and I had that conversation. I was like, wow, because I thought that we were doing all right, Brother T. I'm like, we living in Woodlawn, we I'm in the county. Our family doing okay. We're not poor people. Because in my mind, Brother T, a poor person was the homeless person I saw downtown, living in the cardboard box. So in my mind back then, that was poor. That was poor, but that's not the only example of poor. When you live in paycheck to paycheck, that's poor. Yes. So you may be maintaining your little house in the county or in the suburbs, but at what expense? Soon as you're fired, that's gone. Your car's gone, your house is gone, everything is gone. That's not a rich person's situation. That's a poor person's situation or circumstance, So anyway, Brother T, wanted to shout out King Freeman in the building. Yapo said, need them for what? He said, need white people for what? If I want to get treated like crap, I'll just go visit my mother. You know what? He said, psych, my mother-in-law is awesome. You know what? He's just cutting up. He's just cutting up. Yeah. Someone said, thank you. Always learn something new. Nasir said, yes, I want to watch with my little brother. Ashe. Ashe. All right, family. So I'm going to let you all go. Have a black-tastic week. I'm going to have a watch party on Tuesday at 7 p.m. I think it's 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It may be 7 or it may be 8. But I will be on that panel talking about whether or not we thank you, Night Rider. Night Rider said the working poor. He ain't lying about that. The working poor.
One paycheck away from being homeless equals poor. That's what Gail said. Most definitely the truth.
Yeah, she's right. Gail is right. One paycheck away from being homeless. One paycheck away from being homeless equal. She's right. But I didn't think that, Brother T. I thought like we're doing all right. But whole time moms is in there struggling, to make ends meet. And I thought that we were not rich or wealthy. I knew we weren't that, but I didn't classify us as working poor. Not in my 15, 16-year-old mind. Because my mother created a life for me, give thanks.
Comfort.
Yeah, I was comfortable. I never, I was comfortable.
As we say when we get older, Dr. Ma'at, and Yvette Carnell said this, and it shocked me, hit me, and I always remember this. She says, people just don't know how to count. Not just 1, 2, and 3, but the cost of life. You don't understand how much it costs. So you can't count because it's so much more. We don't understand this life cost to live in this country. And that's why we understand we need our monies. We need our monies. We're going to live, we're going to need our reparations. If that's not going to give, and we have to make do. But in order to understand what this life costs, you got to know how to count. And we learned that they restricted certain things from it so we couldn't even add it up. So we have to look at it. We have to understand that we have to understand what life costs. And today and the future, in order to we can make that generational wealth work.
That's right.
We need to know the number.
They need to know the number.
And most of us don't know our numbers.
That's a fact. That's a fact. And so this was a dynamite bill, Brother T. Looking forward to talking to you next week to discuss chapter 4. I'll be live this week, like I said, on Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, family. Maybe at 7 or maybe at 8. I got to go back and look. But I will be, I think it is 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll do a watch party when we watch The Business of Being Black. So I'll be on there. I can't wait to cut up. But if you don't tune in on Tuesday, have a black-tastic week, family. Peace and black power.